Hi, and welcome back to the Thinkologist. Well, first and foremost, I owe you an explanation for the sudden change in the name of the channel. The new name is largely made up, but to my surprise, it actually has some meaning. Thinkology is the science of thought. Basically, the path we take to reach a conclusion through thinking. Hence, the Thinkologist aims to be the platform where you will find informative and impartial content so that you can reach a conclusion of your own by thinking long and hard about how these trials have shaped and influenced the society we currently live in. Thank you to the 141 viewers and the 12 subscribers who watched the previous episodes in this series. I am profoundly grateful by your support and interest. Make yourself comfortable, I don't know, grab a glass of wine, tea, coffee, or whatever keeps you cozy and comfortable. And let's delve into the fourth trial. Until now, all the trials we discussed culminated into acquittals. However, today's one culminates into the pronouncement of a death sentence, capital punishment. I want to encourage you all to think until next time, where do you stand on this controversial topic of capital punishment? Do you agree or disagree with it being prescribed for certain crimes or not? And if you do or if you don't, I would like to hear your reasons in the comment below this, in the comment box below this video. So 1939, beginning of the Second World War, UK and its allies at war, fighting Nazi Germany, the enemy. Bombings partly destroy prominent London buildings, including St. Paul's Cathedral and the Old Bailey. The Old Bailey hasn't been fully rebuilt until 1950. Now, just as a side fascinating note, and according to this booklet, which presents a local history of South Ascot, the area I currently live in, during the Second World War, and because of the bombings, the Royal Courts of Justice have been moved down from London to just 5-minute walk from where I live right now, which is the Berrysteed. It is right now a functional hotel. But back in 1945, 180 cases were heard here at the Berrysteed during this period, and prisoners were brought down daily from London for trial before Mr. Norman Burkitt. So truly, truly amazing to find this one out. Get out there and grab any book you find on local history. You'll be fascinated. Going back, as a result of the bombings, the juries have been reduced in size as well, from 12 to 7, to reduce the risk of jurors being lost to air raids. Numerous espionage cases have been tried at the Old Bailey, but the one that we will concern ourselves with today was very different. William Joyce, famously known and nicknamed Lord Haw-Haw, was a radio presenter broadcasting propaganda throughout the Second World War. He had his own 2-hour program entitled Germany Calling, where he would broadly spread pure propaganda, but also read out lists of the newly captured prisoners of war, or simply have breaking war news. 1 year into the war, and Germany Calling had 9 million listeners a week, which was more than the number listening to British news bulletins. Joyce was therefore a man who was known to most just by the voice, and there was much debate about its origins. He was in fact born in Brooklyn, United States, so born American, out of an Irish father who later became a naturalized American, and a British mother. He was brought up in Ireland, but gravitated towards London to pursue his studies. This is where in 1930 he developed a strong interest for fascism and swiftly joined the British Union of Fascists, which was the Oswald Mosley's party. He also acquired a British passport in 1933, whose validity ran out in 1940. He soon became one of British far-right most gifted orators, and by 1933, when Hitler assumed power, British Union of Fascists had over 50,000 members. However, the party's momentum was short-lived, and by 1937 Mussolini stopped funding the British Union of Fascists. However, by now William Joyce's ideology has fundamentally changed, his speech being virulently anti-Semitic and arguing that Britain should become an active ally of Hitler in the upcoming imminent war. War began with the UK's declaration of war after Nazi Germany marches into Poland. In light of this event, William Joyce obtains a German travel visa and flies to Germany with his wife Margaret. This is where he gets employed by the Nazi Germany state broadcasting organization known as Rundfunk, what would be the equivalent of BBC in the UK. And this was under the direct patronage of the Third Reich master propagandist Joseph Goebbels. Joyce's program soon became very popular in the UK, with 2/3 of British adult population as regular listeners. Some British listeners regarded it as pure propaganda, but others saw it as entertainment that was thought to have boosted the British morale rather than dented it. Germany calling ran for 6 years, which is the entire duration of the Second World War. In 1945, with Hitler dead and with the Allies conducting mass raids across Berlin, it was crystal clear that Germany was facing defeat. Berlin became a hellish place to live, and in this context, William Joyce, alongside other prominent figures of the time, such as Himmler, the head of the SS, were driven to Donetsk for shelter. This is where Himmler ultimately committed suicide by swallowing cyanide, and Joyce surrendered to 2 British officers. Joyce was subsequently flown into England and charged with treason, but quite surprisingly he returned as a celebrity rather than a prisoner facing a capital charge. He was entirely unrepentant about his conduct in the 6 years broadcasting propaganda on behalf of the enemy. The prosecution, led by Hardley Shawcross, King's Counsel, did not really have a strong case against him. Remember, Joyce was a born American, which really meant that he could not be tried in a British courtroom at all. It was found out by FBI that in 1940 Joyce became a German citizen, and at that time and in the context of the war, US law provided that any American who obtained foreign citizenship during the war automatically lost their American citizenship. This ruled out, of course, the chances of Joyce being tried in an American courtroom. So now we had Joyce remanded at the Brixton prison, chances of a conviction growing thin, supporters of Germany calling a gathering outside the Old Bailey, and an overall sense of solidarity with the prisoner at the bar. This atmosphere was, of course, very dangerous for the prosecution, so they only had a feeble piece of evidence to rely on, and that was Joyce's possession of a British passport. And the prosecution argued that because Joyce possessed at some point a British passport, that possession imposed a duty of allegiance to the crown. As the law stood back in 1945, a person could only be found guilty of treason if he owed a duty of loyalty and faithfulness to the crown. So to recap, because this is rather confusing, given for me at times, in a nutshell, the prosecution case against Joyce was that as a holder of a British passport, whether a British national or not, he benefited during its validity by the protection of the crown when he was abroad. If a person is entitled to that protection, it didn't matter whether you claimed the protection or not. All it matters if you can be entitled to it. Then he or she had a reciprocal obligation of allegiance to the crown. Consequently, if a person was subject to a duty of allegiance to the crown, then if he adhered to the crown's enemies in times of war, he was guilty of treason. Then the prosecution started a parade of witnesses. Among these was Albert Hunt, who claimed to have written down transcripts of Joyce's broadcasts in 1943 and 44. But this evidence was thin because, as we know now, Joyce did not owe allegiance to the crown in 1943 and 1944, but just until 1940. So for roughly a few months between 1939 and 1940. In the second day of the trial, his defense counsel, Gerald Slade, King's counsel, called the defense witnesses, mainly Joyce's family, friends, and members. They all confirmed an obvious truth. Joyce was an American citizen. In the third and final day of the trial, the judge directed the jury that the mere possession of a British passport did impose a duty of allegiance on the holder. All then that was left for the jury to decide on was whether the voice Albert Hunt heard was that of William Joyce, and whether such a broadcast constituted adherence to the enemy. Unlike every criminal trial, here the defendant was well known, and each and every juror was well known, to each and every juror before they came to the jury box. His voice rang loud and clear, echoing German calling for over 5 years. Yet it was now clear that nothing Joyce did after 1940, so in the bigger bulk of the Second World War, could be actually construed as criminal. His treason, if it was treason, was confined to some months when his British passport was valid during the war. This evidence was embarrassingly thin for the prosecution, but despite this, William Joyce was found guilty of treason. Every defendant found guilty of a capital crime had the right to speak before the sentence was passed. The traditional wording ran as follows: prisoner at the bar, you stand convicted of high treason or whatever crime it was. Have you anything to say why the court should not give you judgment according to the law? To this question, Joyce said nothing at all. On a personal note, and as an aspiring barrister myself, I don't think I could endure the awfulness of the pronouncement of a sentence of death on a client. Just the thought of it makes me ill. It's barbaric, abhorrent, and primitive. Once again, please give me your thoughts on capital punishment in the comment box below. Maybe you'll convince me otherwise. There was an appeal which was sadly, there was an appeal which was dismissed. So this was the end of the road for William Joyce. He is said to have received some 58 letters in the run-up for his appeal, many of them supportive, though another containing some rat poison. His wife Margaret was allowed to visit him in the days before his hanging. He was reportedly calm, still unrepentant, and proud to die for his ideals, but sorry for the sons of Britain who have died without knowing why. Joyce is said to have smiled as he looked down at his trembling knees, being led by Albert Pierpoint to the execution chamber in Wandsworth Prison. Only one other civilian was ever hanged for treason on British soil at the end of the Second World War, and his name was John Amory. Very interesting case, this one as well, we will delve into, who tried to recruit British prisoners of war for a SS unit in order to ostensibly fight Bolshevism. His trial lasted just 8 minutes before he was rushed to the gallows. Now, just like a last comparative note, 6 months after Joyce's hanging, Shawcross was back again in court number 1 to prosecute Alan Nunn Day, a physics lecturer at the University of London who had worked on atomic research and who shared secrets to the Russians, nuclear secrets to the Russians. Despite the seriousness of his treachery, which helped the Soviets develop their atomic weapons, he received just 10 years imprisonment. The fundamental difference here, however, is that Britain was not at war with the Soviet Union. Thank you again greatly for your time and attention, and may you have a cozy rest of the weekend. Keep safe and switched on to history, to good information, to anything that can make you think further into how the past shaped the present, and how, having a thorough understanding of the present, we can to a certain degree predict our future. Thank you again, and goodbye.